Thanks, Stewart. So first I want to pay my respects to the Yagara and Turrbal people as the traditional owners on the lands on which Brisbane sits, and also to the 70-odd groups that have practiced custodial rights over the Great Barrier Reef. My name's Gillian and I'm an environmental anthropologist. Sorry, I should have put that up. So my name's Gillian, these are my colleagues, this is what I'm talking about today, which is the regional deep dive. Now, there's a very detailed theoretical framework around the deep dive, but just to sum it up because of the speed dating element, I think about reef adaptation as an experiment in drawing together both the reef's adaptive capacity, but also the agency of communities to form futures that are both ecologically and socially meaningful and inclusive. I work on the regional deep dive, which aims to provoke an initial dialogue with reef communities about the possibilities of reef adaptation so that we can make their aspirations matter in the design and deployment of RRAP interventions. We're aiming to conduct 120 in-depth interviews with members of reef communities, and we're currently at around 80, and we've carefully analysed and mapped out this dialogue so that we can gain insights into things like the different relationships communities practice with the reef and the capitals that is formed in those connections, potential community impacts to these relationships posed by RRAP interventions, and perceptions of RRAP interventions, and also other forms of reef management, such as novel forms of crown of thorns starfish control, which Lockie's going to touch on in a moment. Today, I just want to share with you two composite narratives or stories that communities follow as they're talking about the future of the reef and then considering the prospect of RRAP. So the diagram at the top here shows the first story that participants tell. It's a less dominant narrative when they're asked about what they think the most probable future for the reef will look like. In this narrative, participants describe the likely future of the reef as okay, and they base this on 4 different claims. The first is that collective concern or doom and gloom about the reef, especially around climate change, is actually misguided and is motivated by corrupt or self-interested outside forces. That greater integrity will be found in first-hand local knowledge and accounts of what the reef actually looks like. And the reef's natural stability and its resilience within regular cycles of disruption and recovery. And the fourth claim is that this can be effectively protected through local community stewardship and care. The bottom diagram shows how within this narrative, the prospect of RRAP provokes a set of concerns around disrupted local community cohesion and degraded reef resilience, 2 things upon which this stable imagined future is so contingent. In the second, and this is a far more dominant narrative, the future of the reef is anticipated to be one of growing adversity and ecological loss. And this is built around 3 central claims, which are in the blue here. That the reef is growing more precarious due to a multiple and complex set of threats, which are being compounded by climate change, and that this precarity is already evident and can be directly witnessed by local communities, and that collective political and social systems, which include things like apathetic governments, science hamstrung by interests, and disempowered publics, are woefully inadequate to reverse this downward trend. Upon arriving at this dire prediction, however, the narratives go in 2 directions. A few participants resign themselves to an inevitably bad future, but most narratively resist by finding contingencies to their claims about reef precarity. The first they find in the reef's mutability, its ability to surprise by recovering from setbacks and responding to care. And the other is in the possibility that the reef's precarity might drive humanity to finally get its act together politically, ethically and socially, and practice more responsibility, respect and care for the reef. So while this sounds a bit dire, while they imagined a probable future that wasn't good, the narrative also opened up new possibilities and hope in the prospect of social change, justice, and reconciliation. However, when considering the prospect of RRAP, this then diffracted and divided this narrative. On one hand, participants expressed consolation in the prospect of technologically assisted adaptation, and also expressed a sense of obligation to consider it, given the dire likely future they had imagined. But on the other, they expressed a sense of loss. By engineering ecological recovery, they imagined that RRAP would allow the broader collective to sidestep the need for change and transformation, and that technocratic approaches would replace the need for human care, respect, and responsibility for the reef. So the price of an RRAP future was the alternative future that they imagined becoming possible through social change, justice, and reconciliation. This is my last slide. So like Stewart said, these stories don't indicate an entrenched resistance to the idea of adaptation, but they do highlight kind of imagined gaps in the ways that communities imagine themselves, the reef, and futures enabled by science and technology. And they're painted as being in competition with each other, being in competition with futures enabled by local community cohesion and collective transformation. So at the moment, it seems like reef communities can imagine possible futures enabled by good communities, good politics, or good science, but they can't as yet imagine a future in which all of these happen together. So the priority for RRAP then is it needs to be found around enriching these futures, the futures that we imagine possible through adaptation. And this will require a more generous exchange between scientists, decision makers, and communities, a plurality of different forms of knowledge, and an expansion of the options and outcomes offered by RRAP beyond ecological recovery to include forms of community agency and collective political and social transformation. So that's me.